Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. In this episode of In the Shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, we'll explore the rich and poignant history of Holmesville, New South Wales, and the story of its founding family. It's here that Jospeh Holmes, a miner from England, seeking a new life for his family, carved out a legacy that still resonates today. Let's join Benita Parker from the West Wallsend District Heritage Group as she unravels the fascinating life and times of Jospeh Holmes, his family, and the early settlers who shaped Holmesville.
Shh. Listen. The superb lyrebird is up to 100 centimetres long, including the tail, and looks like a large brown pheasant. The adult male has an ornate tail with special curved feathers that in display assume the shape of a lyre, thus the name. About 80% of the lyrebird's song consists of expert mimicry of many sounds joined together in a rousing medley. Just imagine if you were an early settler, newly arrived from England, as was Jospeh Holmes in 1862, walking through your recently acquired land in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, and heard and perhaps saw this exotic creature. Jospeh Holmes was born in 1831 at Marsh Green, a small village in Pemberton, Lancashire in England. His parents are recorded as Samuel and Hannah Holmes, names later given to two of his children. Jospeh married Mary Clark Woodhead at a little church in Darfield near Barnsley on the 11th of May 1856. Only 3 days before they sailed for Australia. Incidentally, Mary's brother, Joshua Woodhead, also migrated to Australia some years later and built a general store in Holmesville near his sister. When Jospeh Holmes left England, the shipping records show that he was 25 years old, Church of England, in good health, but could neither read nor write, while his wife, Mary, who was only 19, could both read and write. Jospeh Holmes, his wife, Mary, his cousin John, aged 29, and his wife, Emma, all arrived in Sydney on the 22nd of August, 1856, on board the Herald. Both men were miners and had worked in mines in Barnsley, Yorkshire, England. When they arrived in Newcastle area, both took up work in the Lambton mine and later at J&A Brown's collieries at Minmi. Their children's birth records show that both families moved several times but lived in and around Newcastle from 1856 to 1862. Although this podcast is mainly about Jospeh Holmes, after whom Holmesville was named, it's important to spend a few moments reflecting on his cousin John and his wife Emma. She had left her own family back in Darfield, a little village near Barnsley in Yorkshire, to accompany John to Australia. John and Emma had 4 children, Sarah, James, William and Martha, between 1857 and 1865, all born in Australia. John and Jospeh both took up land grants in the parish of Terralba, county of Northumberland, in 1862. John was granted portion 48, which bordered on the land taken up by Jospeh Holmes. Joseph's land was portion 1847 of 101 acres, for which he paid £100 on the 28th of August 1862. This was the portion of land he later subdivided for his children. John's property later became known as Estelville after he had returned to England, and it had been sold on. However, when they first settled, they called the area and their home Holy Flat. In the early days of setting up his home, John found the earth suitable for brickmaking, and so he set up a brickworks and kiln. It was thought that it was located on what is now Seaham Street, Holmesville, where there is evidence of a quarry site and a pug mill used for mixing materials to make bricks. But all this is now lost to history and development. The following story is a sad tale of what happened to John, Emma, and their family. On the 4th of August, 1865, the Sydney Morning Herald wrote about the death of a small child named William Holmes, aged 3 years. The coroner's report is quite detailed and lengthy, but in summary says, evidence given by Emma Holmes. I live at Holy Flat Cottage. I'm the mother of the deceased William Holmes. He's 3 years old. About 2 o'clock yesterday, the deceased and his sister, aged 7 years, were in the front of the cottage, about 70 yards distance. The children came in to the house, and the little girl told me that her brother was bitten by a black snake with a red belly. Mary Holmes ran from her house close by and nursed William, while her sister-in-law Emma ran to meet her husband John, who was on his way home from work at the Minmi mine. He came in, saw the child's distress, tried to make the wound bleed, but then raced off to Wallsend to get the doctor. Of course, Wallsend is some 4 miles from Holy Flat, and John was on foot as they had no other transport. By the time they returned, William had died. It's assumed he was buried at Wallsend, as there was no cemetery near Holy Flat. This trauma was enough to cause the family to return to England a few years later. Both John and Joseph continued to stay in touch. John even tried to convince Joseph to leave this rough and terrible country and return to England with his family. But by this time, Joseph had settled into his new life, and his children were growing up as young Australians. While in Australia, John had failed to maintain his portion of land to the required standard. So when they left, the land reverted to the Crown. It was later reapportioned. It is thought that in 1872 Mr. James Price purchased that portion, but in November 1886 it changed hands again. The new purchasers were Edward W. Spark and John Scoley, who sold it on in 1905 to a consortium that subdivided the area. About this time, the subdivision was given the name of Estelville, after the popular local politician John Estel. Estel had been born in Minmi in 1861, was appointed to the government upper house in 1899, and remained in politics until his death in 1928. Many years later, on the 1st of May in 1991, Estelville eventually became part of Holmesville. Let me return to the life of Joseph and his family. Joseph and Mary had a large family of 12 children, 2 of whom died in infancy. The first 4 children, Mary Ann, Samuel, Cecily and Margaret, were born before the family settled on their portion of land in 1862. Rose or Rosanna was registered at Terralba in 1865, and then Joseph, Sarah, Amelia, Charlotte and William were all born at Holy Flat. William's birth was the last recorded in 1879, 23 years after his parents had made the momentous decision to migrate to Australia. It seems that the original move from Newcastle to the area of Holy Flat may have been prompted by an issue that arose in Newcastle in 1861. The Australian Agricultural Company, for which Joseph was working at that time, was asked by the Miners' Committee of Management to sack Jospeh Holmes. The reason given was that he had given the lowest tender for work at the company's pit without consulting the Miners' Committee of Management, and he had failed to pay his 20 shillings dues owing to the union. The company held firm for some time, but eventually Joseph was dismissed. This possibly hastened his request for a conditional purchase of land on which to settle his family. After his dismissal, he began work at the Minmi mine, and this was the address given when he applied for and received a grant of 101 acres, being portion 47 for £100 on the 28th of June, 1862. The first home that Joseph built for his family was, like so many of the early settlers' homes, a rough slab cottage which was extended as the family grew. In the West Wallsend District Museum collection, there is an excellent photograph of this first home and also of the beautiful brick home which he built in 1895 to replace this first cottage. Joseph successfully operated a dairy farm while still working as a miner. His girls delivered milk to Minmi, where there was a strong mining community at this time. He also established an orchard and grew vegetables for themselves and to sell. In this way, the growing family members were kept busy and contributed to the family lifestyle. In 1893, the three Holmes men, Joseph Sr., Samuel and Joseph Jr., were all working in the Monkwearmouth mine, later known as CM No. 1. Then, on the 3rd of July, 1893, disaster struck the family. At about 9 a.m. on the day of their shift, Joseph Sr. and Joseph Jr. were bottom-holing when Joseph Sr. heard the noise of a roof fall. Joseph had learnt about top-holing and bottom-holing back in the mines of Yorkshire and had brought the method to Minmi, where he worked. Later, when he moved to CM No. 1 mine, he introduced the practice there. He turned and saw his son pinned beneath a great pile of coal. Both men were injured, but Joseph Jr. was severely injured, and it took some time to get him out of the mine and to hospital. Joseph Jr. underwent several operations, but he died on the 19th of July, 1893. It is thought that he was the first person to be buried in the new West Wallsend Cemetery. His impressive headstone also carries the names of his mother and father, both of whom died some years after this terrible accident. His father recovered, but always suffered from chronic back pain. Joseph Holmes Sr. was an intelligent, thinking man. He had realised that the future lay in land. As he was ineligible to apply to the Lands Department because he already had a portion of land, he had his second son, Samuel, now 16, apply in his name. And on the 29th of August 1875, Samuel was granted portion 124. Over the next 3 years, they were granted a total of 300 acres, including portions 125 and 126, on the slopes of Mount Sugarloaf. Soon after acquiring this land, Joseph and his sons drove a tunnel into the side of the mountain and proved that there was coal on their land. C.M. Colliery offered to buy the land for £200, but this was refused. Eventually, in 1907, Joseph received £6,000 for those portions of land. In 1889, Joseph had set about subdividing and selling allotments on portion 49. This was regardless of the fact that he didn't have complete ownership of the land. It wasn't until the 19th of February 1895 that he finally gained ownership of that portion 49 of 100 acres for £200. He set out charges of £20 per lot and an interest rate of 8%, as well as 6 pence per week land rent until the lot was purchased. When the subdivision was drawn up, Joseph named many of the streets after his children. These streets, such as Charlotte, Margaret, and William, can still be seen today. He had gone to considerable trouble to have plans drawn up and a map made in readiness for the land auction in a large subdivision of Lot 49, which he had named Holmesville, township near West Wallsend. This was the foundation of the private town of Holmesville. In the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate between the 22nd of June 1889 and the 18th of October 1889, there appeared a series of unusual advertisements. These ads were placed less than 12 months after the opening of the West Wallsend coal mine at West Wallsend. There was still reference to this proposed auction until the day before the actual auction. However, it appears that it never eventuated. Perhaps Joseph didn't follow correct procedure as the subdivision was not passed by the Lands Department. The following extract is taken from the original advertisement. An important land sale is announced by Mr. Alfred Asher to take place tomorrow, Saturday, on the ground where 100 acres of land, subdivided into 300 large building and garden lots, will be offered. The locality of the land is Holmesville near West Wallsend, about 1.5 miles from Cockle Creek Railway Station, and in the midst of several collieries, which are being rapidly developed. The soil is very suitable for garden and orchard purposes. The terms are most liberal, the object of the vendors being principally to induce settlement on the estate. Intending purchasers may arrive at the scene of the sale by means of the bus which leaves Wallsend on arrival of the morning train, or by a trolley which will meet the train at Cockle Creek. It wasn't until the 8th of March, 1898, the Lands Department gave final approval for the subdivision, and the first block was sold to William McNaughton on the 29th of April, 1898. On the 20th of May, 1898, the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners Advocate reported a happy family event in the Holmesville family. It was the 42nd anniversary of the marriage of Joseph and Mary in the following words. A very pleasant event took place at Mr. Joseph Holmes' residence, Holmesville, West Wallsend, on Saturday last, the occasion being the celebration of Mr. and Mrs. Holmes' 42nd year of married life. Joseph Sr. was a family man and was keen to keep his family close to him in this new country in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf. He later divided his original portion, number 47, into 9 blocks, approximately 10 acres each. These blocks lay between Apple Tree Road and Government Road, starting along the banks of Flaggy or Slaty Creek, which flowed beside his property. A private lane, still visible today, gave access from Apple Tree Road to each block. Joseph settled himself on Lot 5, which was near the creek, where he planned to develop a vineyard on the sandy, flatter soil. Joseph sold Lot 1 to his daughter Amelia, who had married Arthur Lewis for £50. The date of this transaction was 22nd of June 1906, which was just some months after his wife Mary had died. Amelia and Arthur built a home at number 53 Apple Tree Road. Arthur became the under-manager of Killingworth Mine and was fortunate that he survived the disastrous explosion that closed the mine in 1910. Amelia followed her father's example and subdivided and sold 6 house blocks fronting Apple Tree Road. They had a family of 6 children and were very involved in the Presbyterian Church in West Wallsend. Then Lot 2 was sold to Samuel for £40. He had married Sarah Smalley in 1881. On this lot, Samuel had built a beautiful home, which they called Fern Cottage. It was surrounded by fruit trees, including persimmons, loquat and pear trees, as well as a very large and deep well. And they had 5 children. Lot 3 was sold to Charlotte, who married Henry Longworth for £47. Charlotte was born in 1876, the year her oldest sister Mary Ann was married. She and Henry raised their family of 6 children in West Wallsend. Joseph sold Lot 4 to Margaret, who had married Henry Oakes for £50. Henry and Margaret were foundation members of the West Wallsend Cooperative Society. Henry was a contractor doing road construction and a bushman. For some years, they and their family lived in the home on their lot, but when it was severely damaged by earthquake, the family moved to Young Wallsend. Lot 5 was the lot that Joseph had chosen for himself. William lived on this lot and inherited it on his father's death. He became a carpenter, and there are many buildings in Holmesville where he either built the home or was involved in the building, such as the Holmesville Hotel. Although he owned this lot, William and his wife Elizabeth built their beautiful home in William Street, Holmesville. Many years later, when he retired from building, they moved to Cardiff. They had 4 children, 2 girls and 2 boys, one of whom was named Sherlock. It was Sherlock who became trustee for the Holmesville estate when his father William died in 1965. Lot 6 was sold to Rosanna and her husband John Talbot, who became very involved in Lake Macquarie Shire Council. He was on council for 25 years, and at one stage he was Shire President. Mary Ann, who was the oldest of the family and had married George Grey in 1876, bought Lot 7. Only a few years after they were married, they moved to Queensland, where George became a successful gold miner. Lot 8 was sold to Cecily, who married Edward Grey, a miner and brother of George. Cecily and Edward lived in Margaret Street, where they raised their family of 8 children. Next, Sarah Ellen, who was married to Richard Dick Frith in 1890, purchased Lot 9 from her father. They had 7 children, including 5 sons. Sarah and her husband Richard established a brickyard at the corner of William Street and Apple Tree Road, not long before Joseph built his own beautiful new brick home at Holy Flat in 1895, where he and his wife Mary lived until her death. After the Friths brickworks closed down in about the 1930s, Richard Frith worked as a hostler veterinarian in Holmesville and looked after pit ponies which were extensively used in the mines. Incidentally, Richard was the older brother of T.C. Frith, Thomas Charles, who left school at a young age to work for his brothers, William and Richard, at the brickworks they had established at Holmesville. When he was 14, he started work, and 2 years later, he became a junior shop assistant, obtaining the necessary experience for his future career in retailing at the well-known company of T.C. Frith Bullaroo. Joseph took his civic responsibilities seriously. He donated land to build the Congregational Church, and his son William built the church at a cost of £150. This is where the children attended Sunday school. Sunday school picnics were often held on Joseph's property down near the creek. Joseph was also a member of the Manchester Unity Independent Order of Oddfellows Lodge, where his name appeared first on the list of members. As their family reached adulthood, married and established their own lives during the 1870s through the 1880s and 1890s, some of the children remained on their lot or in Holmesville, but not as Joseph had foreseen it when he subdivided his first land grant. His lovely wife, Mary, suddenly took ill and died in January 1905 when she was only 66 years old. Her funeral was described in the newspaper as one of the longest cortèges ever seen in the district. She was buried in the family grave alongside her son, Joseph. Joseph Sr. felt the loss of his wife greatly, as he had poor health. He had a severe back condition that caused him constant pain and made him stooped as he walked. One relative recalled Joseph as an old man limping up to a wooden fence and bumping his head against it to ease his pain. Some family traditions say it was as a result of his trying to save his son at the time of the terrible accident in 1893, but others say it was a separate incident he suffered in another mine accident. He continued to live on his property, but as his condition continued to deteriorate, he was cared for by two of his granddaughters. His funeral procession departed from his daughter Sarah Frith's home on the 22nd of April 1912. Jospeh Holmes had come to Australia in 1856, seeking a new and better life for himself and his new wife. He had settled on a portion of land in the parish of Terralba in 1862, in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, and through his diligence and hard work, when he died in 1912, left a legacy that will always be remembered. The locality of Holmesville will stay on our maps forever into the future, and his descendants will continue to contribute to this new land.
And so, in the shadow of Mount Sugarloaf, the legacy of Jospeh Holmes endures. His pioneering spirit, sacrifices, and hard-won successes are embedded in the fabric of Holmesville, a community still standing strong today. In the next episode in this series, Benita examines the development of coal mining and its impact on the land and communities of West Wallsend and its surrounds. Be sure to join us again on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.